The letter reached the Wyoming post office on a windy morning, but no one there knew it would change two quiet lives forever. It carried no perfume, no ribbon, and no promises. Inside rested only a few careful pages from a woman who had read one unusual sentence and decided it deserved an answer. If this story speaks to you, stay with it until the end, because the smallest line in a newspaper can sometimes carry the weight of a lifetime. Months earlier, Nathan Cross sat alone inside his ranch house outside Laramie. Late sunlight stretched across the rough wooden floor, while a coffee pot hissed softly over the stove. A single gray hat rested on the table beside him. Before touching the blank paper, he looked once toward the empty sleeve pinned neatly against his coat. Most men wrote about rich land, healthy cattle, or growing fortunes. Nathan wrote the sentence others warned him never to write. "I have one arm." He stopped there. The words looked plain enough. They carried no excuse and asked for none. Only after writing them did he add that he owned a horse ranch, was 32 years old, and hoped to meet a woman willing to build an honest life beside him. He folded the paper once and carried it into town before sunrise the next morning. Nathan had lost his left arm 5 years earlier during the war. The wound healed long ago, yet strangers still looked first at the empty sleeve before they looked into his face. That never angered him. What wore him down was watching people pretend they had noticed nothing. So he decided any woman answering his notice would know the truth before learning anything else. Far away in Boston, Sarah Cole finished another exhausting day inside a crowded hospital. She washed dried medicine from her hands, tied back loose strands of chestnut hair, and walked slowly toward the small boarding room she rented above a bakery. She was 27. 8 years of caring for injured soldiers and laborers had filled her days with broken bones, fever, and long nights beside narrow beds. She rarely spoke about those years. The work had taught her to steady trembling hands before touching another person. That habit never left. Each Sunday evening she opened the newspaper left behind in the boarding house parlor. She always skipped politics. She ignored advertisements for boots and farm tools. Instead, she quietly read the marriage notices. Most sounded nearly identical. One man listed 300 cattle before mentioning his own name. Another demanded a wife who never argued. A widower promised church every Sunday and expected perfect cooking every evening. Sarah folded each page without interest. Then one short notice caught her eye. "I have one arm and a horse ranch in Wyoming. Both still serve me well. I was advised to mention the missing arm first, so no one feels surprised later." She smiled before realizing she had done it. Not because the notice sounded amusing, because it sounded honest. She read it again. Then once more. Nowhere did the man ask for pity. Nowhere did he hide behind grand words. He simply placed the truth where everyone could see it. That evening she lit a small lamp and began writing. She introduced herself. She explained that she had spent years caring for wounded men, including many who had learned to live with missing arms or legs. She mentioned the work without making it the center of the letter. Then she wrote something unexpected. "I hope your horses behave better than most of my patients." She smiled again. It was the first light-hearted sentence she had written in many months. Several weeks later, Nathan opened her letter while sitting beneath the porch roof as rain drifted across the Wyoming grasslands. He noticed something immediately. Sarah mentioned his missing arm only once. After that, she wrote about weather, work, stubborn patience, and how silence sometimes made better company than endless talking. Nathan read every line twice. Then he laughed softly into the empty yard. He reached for fresh paper. Their letters continued through spring. Soon they exchanged stories instead of introductions. Nathan described teaching frightened horses without harsh ropes. Sarah described calming frightened children before cleaning deep cuts. Neither tried to impress the other. Neither hurried toward grand declarations. One evening Nathan wrote, "Between us, we already have 3 good hands." Weeks later, Sarah answered, "3 careful hands often finish work that 4 careless ones never could." Nathan folded her letter slowly. Outside, wind rolled through the endless grass. For the first time in years, tomorrow felt as though it might be carrying someone toward him instead of passing him by. By early summer, Sarah resigned from the Boston hospital without ceremony. The head nurse thanked her for years of steady work. Several younger nurses hugged her before she left. Sarah accepted their kindness with a quiet smile, picked up her single trunk, and boarded the westbound train before sunrise. The journey lasted 6 long days. Cities slowly disappeared behind fields. Fields gave way to rivers. Then the rivers surrendered to endless prairie beneath an enormous sky. Each mile carried her farther from the only life she had known. She unfolded Nathan's first advertisement several times during the trip. The paper had softened along the folds. The words remained as direct as the day they were printed. "I have one arm." She wondered how many people had stopped reading after that first sentence. She never understood why they would. When the train finally rolled into Laramie, warm winds swept dust across the platform. Passengers hurried toward waiting wagons. Sarah stepped down carefully, holding her traveling bag close. She recognized Nathan immediately, not because of the empty sleeve, because he stood exactly as he had written, straight, patient, watching the arriving passengers without pushing through the crowd. When their eyes met, he removed his gray hat with one smooth movement. "Miss Cole?" "Mr. Cross." His voice carried the rough edge of open country. Her answer carried years of quiet hospital halls. For a brief moment, neither moved. Nathan finally smiled. "I would offer a handshake." "You already have." He looked puzzled. In every letter, the corners of his mouth lifted before he reached for her trunk. Without hesitation, he balanced its weight against his shoulder and guided her toward the wagon waiting beside the station. The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours. Neither filled the silence simply because silence existed. Nathan pointed toward distant hills where wild horses often gathered. Sarah admired fields stretching farther than she had imagined possible. The air smelled of warm grass, fresh earth, and approaching rain. Everything felt larger than Boston, even the quiet. The ranch house stood beside a line of cottonwood trees. It was modest, weathered, and carefully maintained. Nothing about it suggested wealth. Everything suggested years of honest work. A brown ranch dog bounded across the yard. He circled Sarah twice before sitting directly on her boots. Nathan chuckled. "Scout has decided you belong here." I am grateful for his approval. "You should be. Mine took much longer." Inside the house, Sarah noticed simple order everywhere. Tools rested exactly where they belonged. Shelves held neatly folded blankets. A single iron hook waited beside the front door. Nathan hung his gray hat there in one practiced motion before leading her farther inside. He never glanced toward the empty sleeve. Neither did she. That evening they shared stew at the kitchen table. Conversation came easily, not because they agreed on everything, because neither pretended to be someone else. Nathan admitted he burned biscuits often enough to frighten neighboring ranchers. Sarah confessed she had never learned to bake bread properly. Nathan laughed. "Then we'll both survive somehow." During the following days, Sarah quietly settled into ranch life. She rose before sunrise. She learned the rhythm of feeding chickens, collecting eggs, and preparing simple meals before the ranch hands returned from the pastures. Nathan never asked her to prove herself. She simply joined the work naturally. One afternoon, she found a cabinet holding old bandages, medicine bottles, and worn medical tools. Without saying a word, she cleaned every shelf. She wrapped fresh bandages. She labeled bottles clearly. She discarded supplies too old to trust. Nathan returned near sunset and stopped in the doorway. "You've done more in one afternoon than I managed in 5 years." Sarah brushed dust from her sleeves. "I only placed everything where it belongs. It looks like someone expects people to heal here. They should." Word spread quickly across neighboring ranches. Within days, a young cowboy arrived with a deep cut across his forearm. Sarah stitched the wound while Nathan steadied the frightened horse outside. A week later, an elderly ranch wife came seeking medicine for a stubborn cough. Soon travelers stopped asking where the nearest doctor lived. They simply asked where Mrs. Cross would be, although she had not yet become Mrs. Cross. One evening they sat together on the porch as sunset painted the grass with soft gold. Scout slept across the top step. Nathan slowly turned a coffee cup between his fingers. I almost never placed that advertisement. Sarah looked toward the horizon. What changed your mind? I realized hiding the truth only delayed disappointment. She nodded gently. I nearly ignored it. He turned toward her. What made you answer? You mentioned your missing arm before your ranch. He waited. Most people advertise what they hope others admire. She smiled faintly. You advertised what others might judge first. Nathan lowered his eyes to the porch floor. I was tired of introductions becoming explanations. You never owed anyone an explanation. The breeze carried the scent of sage across the yard. Nathan looked toward the grazing horses. I have another question. I suspected you might. You notice everything. I had to. He drew one slow breath. I don't want someone to manage my life because of this. His empty sleeve rested quietly against his coat. I don't need rescuing, Sarah answered without rushing. I spent years helping wounded men stand again. She looked directly into his eyes. I never came here to carry you. Nathan remained silent. She continued softly. I came because I believed we could walk beside each other. Nathan stared across the open pasture where the last light touched the distant hills. Then he looked back at Sarah. Would you marry me? She held his gaze for a long moment. Scout lifted his head as though waiting too. Finally she smiled. I thought you might never ask. Nathan laughed quietly. For the first time since the war, the empty sleeve resting against his coat seemed smaller than the future standing beside him. If you have stayed with Nathan and Sarah this far, the hardest days of their journey are still waiting, just beyond the next sunrise. They were married the following Saturday inside the small Laramie courthouse. The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. 2 ranch hands stood as witnesses. Scout waited outside the door, scratching at the wood as though he believed he belonged inside with the family. Sarah wore the same gray dress she had traveled west in. Nathan wore a dark coat she had never seen before. When she admired it, he smiled. I bought it the week your first letter arrived. You were planning far ahead. I was hoping. They climbed into the wagon as husband and wife and returned home beneath a wide blue sky that seemed to stretch forever. Life settled into a steady rhythm. Morning began before daylight. Coffee simmered on the stove. Boots crossed the porch before the sun cleared the hills. Sarah prepared breakfast while Nathan checked the horses. By evening they worked side by side without needing many words. Each knew where the other would be. Each trusted the other completely. During autumn, a frightened ranch hand was thrown against a fence while breaking a young colt. Neighbors rushed him to the cross ranch. Sarah cleaned the deep wound and stitched it carefully. Nathan held the lantern through the long night without once being asked. The young cowboy recovered. After that, more people arrived. Children with broken wrists. Mothers burning with fever. Old ranchers whose hands had grown too stiff to hold tools. The small supply room slowly became the nearest medical office for miles. Nathan built stronger shelves. Then a sturdy examination table. Every board was measured with one hand. Every nail was driven with patient care. Sarah ran her fingers across the finished table. It is better than anything I had in Boston. Nathan shrugged. It only needed someone worth building it for. 2 years later, their first son filled the house with loud cries and tiny footsteps. 3 years after that, another boy arrived. The children never questioned how their father saddled horses, repaired fences, or chopped wood. To them, one strong arm had always been enough. One afternoon, the older boy struggled to tie a rope around a fence post. Nathan watched quietly before kneeling beside him. There are many ways to finish one job. The boy nodded. Nathan showed him another knot. It held perfectly. Sarah watched from the porch. Nothing more needed saying. The winter of 1886 tested every ranch across Wyoming. Snow buried fences. Wind pushed through every crack in the house. Cattle disappeared beneath white drifts. Many neighbors lost nearly everything. Nathan had prepared months earlier. Extra hay filled every barn. Water barrels stood covered against the freezing nights. Sarah measured food supplies with careful hands. No one at the ranch missed a meal. When hungry travelers appeared during the storms, another bowl was placed on the table. No questions came first. Food did. Years passed almost without notice. Gray slowly appeared in Nathan's hair. Fine lines gathered beside Sarah's eyes. Scout grew slower. The faithful old dog eventually stopped chasing horses and spent most afternoons beneath the hook where Nathan hung his hat every evening. One cold evening, Scout failed to rise when Nathan returned. Nathan sat beside him until the stars covered the sky. Sarah joined him without speaking. They buried Scout beneath a cottonwood tree overlooking the pasture he had guarded for so many years. The porch felt strangely quiet after that. Still, every evening, the gray hat found the same hook beside the door. Their sons became men. Grandchildren filled the house with laughter. Some climbed onto Nathan's lap. Others followed Sarah through the little medical room, handing her clean bandages while she treated scraped knees and cut fingers. The ranch had become more than land. It had become home for everyone who entered its gate. When Nathan reached 72, a stubborn cough settled deep inside his chest. He insisted it would pass. Sarah listened to each breath through the long nights. She recognized changes no one else could hear. She stayed beside him until the final morning. Sunlight slipped through the bedroom window. Nathan looked toward the door where his gray hat still rested on its hook. Then he looked at Sarah. We still had enough hands. She gently wrapped her fingers around his. We always did. A few quiet breaths later, the room became still. Weeks afterward, Sarah opened the wooden chest holding Nathan's papers. Beneath old army records, she discovered 2 folded advertisements. The first listed cattle, land, and money. Only at the bottom did it mention the missing arm. Across that page, Nathan had written one word: no. The second advertisement was the one she remembered forever. I have 1 arm and a horse ranch. On the back, he had added one final sentence. She read the first line and stayed anyway. Sarah folded the paper carefully and returned it to the chest. That evening, she walked to the front door carrying Nathan's gray hat. For 40 years, she had watched him place it on the same hook. Now she lifted it with both hands and hung it exactly where he always had. The porch stood silent beneath the glowing Wyoming sunset. The hat rested alone. Yet somehow the house still felt wonderfully full. If Nathan and Sarah's journey touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for another unforgettable story from the American frontier.